Hey guys, I'm T and welcome to the channel. If you're new here, we make trendy and fun crochet tutorials twice a week. And if you haven't already, smash that like button, drop a comment down below, and subscribe to join in on the fun. For today's tutorial, we've got another one perfect for the changing weather, a cowl neck tee. For this modern make, it's all about clean lines, so there's not much in the way of texture, instead opting for ribbing that we all love and cap sleeves to feel the breeze. Speaking of, if you're looking for more warm weather makes to feel the breeze in, you are in the right place. We have hundreds of modern crochet tutorials and patterns, with even more dropping twice weekly, so consider clicking the bell to subscribe and you'll never miss an upload. Also, do me a huge favor and give this video a big thumbs up if you like it, or 2 thumbs down if you don't. Either way, it's a great way to show support so I can keep putting out free tutorials every Wednesday and Sunday. Now, it's time to get on the show, so without further ado. For this project, any category 4 yarn will work, but I used a total of 275 grams of yarn, and that's 615 yards if you're stateside. As for tools, a 5mm hook, scissors, stitch markers, and a tape measure. There is a written pattern down below. Use offer code TCDDIY for a discount off any $9.99 plus order, and enter this week's pattern giveaway by telling us if you like to watch foreign films. I actually really enjoy watching foreign films. Details for the giveaway down below. We are using 3 stitches for this project, and they'll be as follows. Chain, slip stitch, single crochet, and half double crochet. This tutorial is made for a size small, but you can adjust it for your size, and we explain how to in the video, so let's get started. Getting this top started, we're all going to grab our category 4 yarn and make a slip knot. Then we're all going to grab our 5mm hook and start off by making a chain that starts 1 inch underneath our underarm down to where like the bottom of this top to be. So this can be cropped or full length. I'd like for mine to be full length. That's roughly 14 inches or 36 centimeters. So I'm going to start by making a chain 60, but I actually already have this portion all finished up, so I'm just going to be doing a small sample size with you. Now that we have our chain, we're all going to get started on our first row, which is a half double crochet row. So block off that last chain and do a chain 2. That chain 2 doesn't count as a stitch, that's our turning chain. Then yarn over, preparing for a half double crochet, and insert your hook into that chain that we blocked off, or the third chain from our hook, with a half double. So go ahead and insert, yarn over, pull through. When you have these 3 loops on our hook, yarn over, pull through all 3. Continue with 1 half double crochet into every chain, leaving the last one. We've made our way down with our row 1. Into that last chain, we're all going to do an increase of 2 half double crochets. So all that's going to be is 1 half double into that last chain, and then a second half double into that same last chain, and that is our increase. Now from here, our following row is going to be a slip stitch row. So we're going to chain 1. That doesn't count as a stitch. That is also our turning chain, and flip our work. And now we're going to be putting 1 back loop slip stitch into every stitch. So finding the last stitch from our previous row, we're going to insert into that back loop only, or the loop that's furthest away from us. When we have these 2 loops on our hook, we're all going to yarn over and gently pull through both of these loops, because we don't want to tug too tightly, otherwise the following row will be too tight to work into. There's our first one. Let's do that again. Into that next stitch, insert into that back loop, yarn over, gently pull through everything, and that's it. Continue with 1 back loop slip stitch into every stitch. Now, everyone's row 2 is complete. Now we're going to repeat our 2 previous rows for this underarm portion, and now they're all within the back loops, so chain 2 and flip our work just to get started on the following row together. What we're going to do is put 1 back loop half double crochet into every stitch with an increase of 2 into the last. So to get this started, yarn over. Into that first stitch's back loop, or the loop that's furthest away from us, insert your hook, pull through, yarn over, pull through all 3, and continue with 1 back loop half double crochet into every stitch, leaving the last. We've put 1 back loop half double crochet into every stitch. Into that last stitch, we're going to do another increase. So into that last stitch's back loop, insert with our first half double crochet, then into that same last back loop with a second half double crochet. And that is our increase for this row. Everyone's following row is going to be a back loop slip stitch row, the same way we did the previous row. So chain 1, flip our work, and then put 1 back loop slip stitch into every stitch. Now for this portion of our piece, what we're going to do is continue to repeat our 2 previous rows until we have a portion that can stretch from mid-underarm over to the corner of our underarm. Then I'll meet you back right after a back loop slip stitch row, and then we can finish up our underarm together from there. We are back. I have just completed my first underarm portion. I have a total of 4 rows. This width is roughly 1 inch or 2 centimeters that is unstretched. Now we just have a few more underarm rows to do to get a really smooth curve that leads up to the shoulder. But just as a really quick tip, please keep in mind that this is still my small sample size because my real one is already completed. But what we're all going to do from here, since we all should have ended right after a slip stitch row, is chain 2, flip our work, and then put 1 back loop half double crochet into every stitch, leaving the last one. We've made our way up with our back loop half doubles. Into that last stitch, we're now going to be doing an increase of 3 back loop half double crochets. So yarn over. Into that last back loop, we are going to insert with 1 back loop half double, same back loop with a second back loop half double, and same back loop with a third back loop half double crochet. Now this row is completed. Now we are going to be doing an increase into our slip stitch row as well. So how we're going to do that is chain 2. That first chain is going to count as a stitch for the following row. Then that second chain is going to be our turning chain. When we have those 2 chains, flip our work. And now we're going to do our slip stitch row down, starting with the second chain from our hook. So we're going to skip that first chain. Into that second chain's back loop, we are going to insert with a back loop slip stitch. So pull all the way through gently. And from here, continue with 1 back loop slip stitch into the rest of our stitches. From here, what we're going to do is continue to repeat our 2 previous rows. Now, these are back loop half double crochets into the last stitch, an increase of 3, and then a back loop slip stitch row that has an increase into it as well until we now have an underarm portion that can stretch, because remember, it will have a decent amount of stretch to it, from mid-underarm over to the front of our body, roughly about where a bra strap or a tank top strap would be. I'll meet you guys back right after a back loop half double crochet row, so along the top, then we can work straight into the shoulder portion from there. I am back and my second underarm portion is complete. I now have a total of 7 rows. My width is now roughly 1 inch or 5 centimeters, still unstretched. Now from here, we're all going to get started on our shoulder portion together, but keeping in mind, this is still my small sample size. So what we're going to do from here, since we all should have ended along the top, is make a chain that reaches the top of our shoulder. So when we're putting this up to ourselves, we want to make sure that this tail end still stays roughly 1 inch underneath our underarm because we don't want our armhole to become too big or too small. But from here, just make a chain that reaches the top of our shoulder, and I've already measured mine out. I need roughly 4.5 inches or 11 centimeters, so I'm going to make a chain 18. So we are back. I've just completed the entirety of my underarm portion. Now I have a total of 7 rows. This width is roughly 2 inches or 5 centimeters unstretched. Now what we're all going to do from here is make a chain that reaches the top of our shoulder. So as a really quick sizing tip, we want to make sure that we're keeping this tail end still at 1 inch underneath our underarm because we don't want the armhole to become too big or too small. Then we're all going to make a chain that is in multiples of 3 that reaches the top of our shoulder. Now I've already measured mine out. I need roughly 4.5 inches or 11 centimeters, so I'm going to start by making a chain 18. Now keeping in mind that this is still my small sample size, I'm going to now do our following slip stitch row because that's the following row in a row sequence. So we're going to block off that last chain and do a chain 1. Into that chain that we blocked off, or the second chain from our hook, we're going to insert with a slip stitch. Then from here, continue with 1 slip stitch into every chain. Once we reach the body, 1 back loop slip stitch into every stitch, and then I'll meet you back. So we have made our way all the way down with our back loop slip stitch row. Then from here, since it's the shoulder portion, we aren't going to have any increases or decreases. So all we're going to do is chain 2, flip our work, put 1 back loop half double crochet into every stitch, and then at the end of the row, chain 1, flip our work, 1 back loop slip stitch into every stitch. All we're going to do is continue to repeat those 2 previous rows, like I said, with no additional increases or decreases until this shoulder portion that we have is roughly 1 inch away from the side of the base of our neck. Then once we have that, I will meet you guys back right after a slip stitch row or along the bottom Then we can get started with our neckline together from there. We are back. I have just completed the entirety of my shoulder portion. Now I have a total of 12 rows. This width is roughly 2.5 inches or 6 centimeters. We are no longer using our small sample size, and now we can get started on the neckline. So what we're all going to do from here is, for everyone, no matter what size we're making, is we're all going to insert our stitch marker into the second stitch from the top. And all we're going to do from here is the following row in our row sequence, so a back loop half double crochet row. So since we're all along the bottom, chain 2, flip our work, 1 back loop half double crochet into every stitch, leaving the last 2 stitches right before our stitch marker. We are back. We've put 1 back loop half double crochet into every stitch, leaving the last 2 stitches right before our stitch marker. Now we're all going to do a decrease of 2. So we're going to yarn over. Into that second to last back loop, insert, pull through. Into that last back loop, pull through. Should have 4 loops on our hook. So yarn over, pull through all 4, and now this first row is complete. Now our following row is going to be a back loop slip stitch row, and we are going to decrease into that row as well. So chain 1 and flip our work. So we do need to start off the following row with a decrease of 2 back loop slips. So into that first stitch's back loop, insert, yarn over, pull through. Into that following stitch's back loop, insert. When we have these 3 loops on our hook, we're going to automatically yarn over and pull through all 3 of those loops. That is our decrease. From here, put 1 back loop slip into the rest of our stitches. The first 2 rows for the decrease side of our neckline is complete. From here, what we're going to do is just continue to repeat our 2 previous rows until we have a portion that can stretch over to mid-chest. So just as a refresher, our back loop half double crochet rows is going to be 1 back loop half double crochet into every stitch while doing a decrease of 2 back loop halves into the last 2 stitches. Then our following slip stitch row is going to start with a decrease of 2 back loop slips, then a back loop slip into the rest of our stitches. Continue those 2 rows until we have a portion that can stretch over to mid-chest like I said, and I'll meet you guys back right after an odd number row or a back loop half double crochet row. We are back. I have just completed the decrease half of my neckline. I now have a total of 21 rows, and this width is roughly 5 inches or 13 centimeters unstretched. Now we're all going to have one middle row. That is going to be a back loop slip stitch row with no increases and no decreases for everyone. So since we're all along the top, we're going to chain 1, flip our work. Put 1 back loop half double crochet into every stitch, making our way all the way down. Like I said, no increases and no decreases. When that row is complete, we can get started on the other side together. So since we're all along the bottom at that point, chain 2, flip our work. Put 1 back loop half double crochet into every stitch, making our way back up, leaving that last stitch, and then I'll meet you back. We are back. We have all just completed our middle row, which was a back loop slip with no increases and no decreases. Then we also got started on our back loop half double, leaving that last stitch. Now before we do the increase together, make sure you're inserting a stitch marker into our back loop slip stitch row, which was our middle row, just so you know where the middle is. Now what we're going to do from here into that last stitch is just an increase of 2 back loop half doubles, so yarn over. Into that last stitch's back loop, insert with 1, then with a second back loop half double crochet, and that's it. Now we are going to need to mirror everything that we did on this side, so we're going to need to do an increase into our slip stitch row as well, which is going to be done pretty much the same way that we did the second half of our underarm portion. So what we're going to do is chain 2 and flip. Starting with the second chain from our hook, we're going to insert with a slip stitch, then put 1 back loop slip stitch into the rest of our stitches. From here, we're going to continue to repeat our 2 previous rows. So that's going to be a back loop half double crochet row with an increase of 2 at the end, then a back loop slip stitch row with an increase the same way that we just did together. Continue to repeat those 2 rows until we have the same amount of rows as the decrease portion of our neckline, and that is not including our middle row. When we have the amount of rows completed, I'll meet you back so we can do our shoulder, then our underarm. We are back. I have just completed the increase side of my neckline. I now have a total of roughly 7 inches or 18 centimeters that is still unstretched. Now we're all going to do our shoulder portion together. So since we all should have ended along the top, what we're going to do is make a chain 2. That is going to be a chain 2 for everyone because we skipped a total of 2 stitches for this side when we got started on our neckline. Then all we're going to do is back loop slip stitch and back loop half double crochet rows with no increases and no decreases for the same amount of rows that we did for this first shoulder portion. Now I'm going to let you guys do that on your own, but just as a quick tip, we should end up with the same amount of stitches that we had for this shoulder portion. But once we have the same amount of rows, I'll meet you back so we can finish up with our underarm. We are back. We have just completed our shoulder portion, and now we're going to get started on the first half of our underarm together. So first things first, what we're going to need to do is insert our stitch marker into the same amount of stitches as chains that we made that led up to our shoulder. So for those of you that had my numbers, I made a chain 18, so along this side, counting from the top, I inserted my stitch marker into the 18th stitch. Now from here, since we should all be along the bottom, put one back loop half double crochet into every stitch, leaving the last 3 stitches right before our stitch marker, and I have actually already gotten that portion completed, so we're going to do our decrease of 3 back loop half doubles together. So what we're going to do is yarn over. Into that third to last back loop, we're going to insert, pull through. Into that second to last back loop, insert, pull through, then into that last back loop, pull through for a total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 loops on our hook. Then yarn over, pull through all 5, and that is how we do our decrease of 3 back loop half doubles. Now we are going to need to decrease into our slip stitch row as well, so chain 1 and flip. Now this is going to be the same decrease that we did for the neckline portion, so as a refresher, into that first stitch's back loop, pull through, next stitch's back loop as well, then yarn over and pull through all 3 of those loops. And from here, continue with 1 back loop slip stitch into the rest of our stitches. Then all we're going to do from here is continue to repeat our 2 previous rows. So as a refresher, it is a back loop half double crochet row with a decrease of 3 back loop half double crochets into the last 3 stitches of the row, then a back loop slip stitch row that starts with a decrease of 2. We are going to continue to repeat those 2 rows until we have the same amount of rows as the second half of our underarm portion. It should be an odd number of rows, so I'll meet you guys back right after we finish up our last back loop half double crochet row, and then we can finish up with the rest of our underarm together. We are back, and I have just completed the first half of my underarm portion. Now I just had a total of 3 rows for this decrease portion, because I had a total of 3 rows for these increase rows. Now we're going to finish up with the rest of our underarm. So everyone's following row should be a back loop slip stitch row. As you guys can see, I have actually already completed my back loop slip stitch row, but all that is just 1 back loop slip stitch into every stitch, so no increases and no decreases. Then we'll end up along the bottom. So put 1 back loop half double crochet into every stitch, leaving the last 2 stitches, and then we're going to do a decrease of 2 back loop half doubles together. So to do our decrease of 2, yarn over, insert your hook into that first stitch's back loop, pull through, next stitch's back loop, which should be the last one, pull through for 4 loops on our hook, yarn over, pull through all 4, and that is that. From here, continue to repeat our 2 previous rows. So just a back loop slip stitch with no increases and no decreases, then a back loop half double crochet row that ends on a decrease of 2 until we have the same amount of rows as the first half of our underarm portion that we did on this side. Once we have that, do a chain up 1 and cut, and then I will meet you back. So we are back. We have just completed our front panel. Now my total width is roughly 9 inches or 23 centimeters, and now that our front panel is completed, we're actually going to be doing almost the exact same thing for the back panel, and I actually already have mine completed, so we're going to look at that together. So both the front and the back panel are going to be done pretty much the same way. The only difference is that we aren't going to have any decreases or increases for the neckline. So just to talk you guys through it, we're all going to start by making the same chain that we made when we got started on our underarm. We're going to be doing the same amount of rows for the same sections, then we're going to work on our shoulder. When it comes to working on our neckline, we are still going to be skipping those 2 stitches from the top. It is going to be 2 for everyone, no matter what size we're making, to match the 2 stitches that we skipped over here. But instead of doing the decreases and increases, just work our way straight across with our back loop half double crochet rows with no increases and no decreases for the same amount of rows that we have from our first neckline row all the way across to our last neckline row. Then do our second shoulder for the same amount of rows that we have as the front panel, and finish off with the underarm that we just did together. Do a chain up of 1 and cut. Once we have the entirety of the back panel completed, I'll meet you back so we can seam it all up together. So now that both our front and our back panel are completed, we're ready to seam up the shoulders. So first things first, we're all going to start by making sure that our work is flipped wrong side out. So the ribbing for both the front and the back panel are faced in on itself, so that once we flip our work right side out, this shoulder seam will be along the inside. Then we're all going to be inserting our hook into the top corner stitch of both the front and the back panel. Insert our yarn onto our hook and pull through everything and do a chain up of 1 just to secure. Now all we're going to do is put 1 single crochet into every side slip stitch row and 2 single crochet into every side half double crochet row, working in through both the front and the back panel at the same time. So getting that started, everyone's first side row should be a side slip stitch row. I'm going to find that top loop, insert my hook within the front panel, find the same top loop within the back panel, find that top loop and insert with another single crochet, and insert and do a single crochet. Then everyone's next side row should be a side half double crochet row. So find that side row within the front panel and insert into that top loop. Find the same side row within the back panel, find that top loop and insert. Then we're going to single crochet around everything. Then, since this is a side half, we're going to be doing another single crochet into the same top loop. So into the front panel and into the back panel, this one should be a little bit easier to do since everything should already be gathered. You're going to single crochet again. And that's it. Continue with 1 single crochet into every side slip, 2 single crochet into every side half until we don't have any more side rows left to work into. When we don't, do a chain up of 1 and cut, then repeat on the other side. So we are back and our shoulder seam is complete. Now we're going to seam our sides. Now for the side seams, we want to make sure that our work is flipped right side out because we're going to do an outside loop slip stitch seam, which is going to look like another back loop slip stitch row. Then we're all going to insert our hook into the bottom corner stitch of both the front and the back panel. We are then going to pull our yarn through, do a chain up of 1 to secure, and to do this outside loop slip stitch seam, find that first stitch into the front panel and insert only into that front loop. Find the next stitch into the back panel and insert only into that back loop. Then yarn over, pull through all 3. Let's do that again. Next stitch into the front panel, insert only into that front loop. Next stitch into the back panel, only into that back loop, and pull through all 3, and that's it. We're going to continue on with this, making our way all the way up. When we don't have any more stitches left to work into, you don't have to do a chain up of 1 and cut because I can meet you back and get started on the sleeve together right away. So we have just finished up our side seam. We've made our way all the way up. Now from here, we're going to single crochet along the entirety of our armhole. So from where we're at, since none of us did a chain up of 1 and cut, we're going to chain 1 and start by putting 2 single crochets into our first side half double crochet row. So making sure that our work is still flipped right side up, we're all going to be working clockwise or to the left, and finding that first side half double, we're going to insert with 2 single crochets. So there is 1 into that same top loop with 2. Now everyone's following side row should be a side slip stitch row, so find that top loop and insert with 1. From here, continue with 2 single crochets into every side half double and 1 single crochet into every side slip stitch row. Once we reach our stitches, put 1 single crochet into every stitch. Then I'll meet you guys back once we're right next to our shoulder seam. We've made our way all the way up to our shoulder seam with our single crochet row. And now that we're here, we do want to make sure that we're inserting a stitch marker into that last single crochet that we just did so we know where one of our middle stitches is. Then, finding the first stitch on the other side of our shoulder seam, we're going to insert our first single crochet into there. And then again, insert a stitch marker into that stitch as well, just like that, so that we know where our 2 middle stitches are. From here, continue with 1 single crochet into every stitch, and then once we reach our underarm portion, 2 single crochets into every side half double, 1 single crochet into every side slip. Then I'll meet you back right after we slip stitch into that chain space. So now that we've made our way all the way around with our single crochet row, now we can all get started on the length of our sleeve. So from here, all we're going to do is start by making a chain the length that we'd like for our sleeve to be. I'd like for mine to be short sleeves, so I'm going to start by making a chain 5, and that's roughly 1 inch or 2 centimeters. Now that we have our chain, we're going to do our first half double crochet row. So block off that last chain and do a chain 2. That chain 2 doesn't count as a stitch, that's a turning chain, then yarn over. Into that chain that we blocked off, or the third chain from our hook, insert with a half double crochet, then continue with half double crocheting into every chain, leaving the last one. We've just put 1 half double crochet into every chain. Into that last one, we are now all going to do an increase of 3 back loop half double crochets. We're now all going to do an increase of 3 half double crochets, so yarn over. Into that last chain, we're going to insert with 1, same last chain with 2, and same last chain with 3 half double crochets. Now from here, we're going to slip stitch it into the base. So how we're all going to do that is start by counting up the next 2 available stitches and making sure that we're working clockwise or to the left as well. So here's 1, here's 2. Into that second stitch into the base, we're going to slip stitch into there. Now that slip stitch into the base doesn't actually count as a stitch, that's just to connect. Then we need to work our way up to the following row, so slip stitch into that following stitch into the base. Still doesn't count as a stitch, and flip our work. Then from here, make our way down with 1 back loop slip into every stitch. So finding the last stitch from our previous row, making sure that we're not working into those slip stitches into the base, just put 1 back loop slip stitch into every stitch, remembering not to tug too tightly. And since we already know how to do our back loop slip stitches at the end of the row, chain 2, flip our work. Put 1 back loop half double crochet into every stitch, leaving the last. Our row 3 is nearly complete. We have made our way down, leaving that last stitch. Now we're all going to do an increase of 3 back loop half doubles, so yarn over. Into that last stitch's back loop, insert with 1, insert with 2, and insert with 3 back loop half double crochets. And now just to connect it into the base together once more, we're going to count up the next 2 available stitches into the base. So there's 1, there's 2. Into that second stitch, insert with a slip stitch. Still doesn't count as a stitch, and to work our way up to the following row, slip stitch into that following stitch into the base. Does not count as a stitch. Flip our work, and then put 1 back loop slip stitch into every stitch, and that's it. From here, we're just going to continue to repeat our 2 previous rows, making sure that we're connecting it into the base the same way that we've been doing this whole time, meeting back once we're worked into our first stitch marker stitch. Once we are, I'll meet you back so we can get started on the decrease side of our sleeve. So we are back. We have made our way all the way up to our stitch marker stitch, and now we're going to do the other side of our sleeve. It's going to be done pretty much the same way as this side, but instead of increases, we're going to be doing decreases. So everyone's last row should have been a half double crochet row. So what we're going to do from here is slip stitch into that following stitch, which should be our next stitch marker stitch, and make our way down with our back loop half double crochet row. Still with no increases and no decreases. Then at the end of that row, chain 2, flip our work. Put 1 back loop half double crochet into every stitch, leaving the last 3 stitches, and then I'll meet you back. So we've just made our way down with our back loop slip stitch row and back up with our back loop half double crochet row, leaving our last 3 stitches. Now into those last 3 stitches, we're all going to do a decrease of 3 back loop half double crochets. So yarn over. Insert your hook into that third to last back loop and pull through. Into that second to last back loop, pull through, then into that last back loop, pull through for 5 loops on our hook, then yarn over, pull through all 5, and connect it into the base the same way that we've been doing. So by counting up the next 2 available stitches, slip stitch into there, and that's it. From here, we're going to continue to repeat our 2 previous rows until we don't have any more stitches left to work into, and when we don't, I will meet you guys back so we can seam it all up together. So I'm coming to you guys from the future, just as one last really quick tip when it comes to doing the very last row. On the decrease side, we're going to end our back loop slip stitch row, then we're going to have just 1 stitch left. We're still going to do our back loop half double crochet row that ends on a decrease of 3, just to make sure that we end our sleeve with the same amount of chains that we made so it's easier to seam up. But just instead of slip stitching it into the second stitch into the base, we're going to slip stitch it just into that 1 available stitch into the base. But once we have that, we are now going to seam it up. So once the decrease side of our sleeve is completed, when it comes to doing our seam, I have actually already finished mine up. It's going to be the same exact outside loop slip stitch seam that we did for the sides. So just to talk you guys through it, making sure that our work is flipped right side out, right side up, we're going to do our outside loop slip stitch seam until we don't have any more stitches left to work into. When we don't, do a chain up of 1 and cut, and then repeat on the other side. Now that both of our sleeves are completed, the next thing we're going to do is our neckline. So first things first, we're all going to want to make sure that we're inserting our hook into the same exact stitch. So we're going to make sure that our work is flipped right side out, right side up, with the front faced up towards us. Then we're all going to insert our hook into that first stitch that we have that's nearest to our shoulder seam that's working down towards our front panel. So it's just into that chain 2 that's nearest to our shoulder seam. Then from here, all we're going to do is working towards the front first. We're going to be putting 1 single crochet into every stitch, Then working our way down our neckline, 2 single crochets into every side half double, 1 single crochet into every side slip, making our way all the way up until we reach our last stitch that we have right before our shoulder seam. Now, once we have that done, we are going to want to insert our stitch marker into some places. It's going to be within the first stitch, that middle stitch, which should be right where our middle stitch marker is, and then that last stitch, just so we know exactly where the front is. Once we have that, continue on with the rest of our single crochet row and then slip stitch into that chain space when it's completed. Now, lastly, the single crochet row is going to be as wide as this portion can stretch. So once when you made your way all the way around, try your piece on, making sure that everything is still fitting nicely. If it's a little bit too tight, redo some stitches with a looser grip, or if it's too loose, redo some stitches with a tighter grip. So we have all just completed our single crochet row along our neckline. Now that everything is fitting nicely, we're now going to make a chain the length that we'd like for our cowl to be. Now, I'd like for my cowl to be roughly 5 inches or 13 centimeters, so I'm going to start by making a chain of 25. Now that we have our chain, we're all going to do a half double crochet row all the way up. So block off that last chain and do a chain 2. Doesn't count as a stitch, that's our turning chain, then yarn over, into that third chain from our hook with a half double crochet, and continue with 1 half double crochet into every chain until we reach the base. Now that we've put 1 half double crochet into every chain, we're going to connect it into the base. So making sure that we're connecting it into our next stitch marker stitch or working towards the front, we're going to insert just into that next available stitch, which is our stitch marker stitch. So I'm going to take this out for now. Just insert into there with a slip stitch. Now that slip stitch still doesn't count as a stitch, that's just to connect. Then to work our way up to the following row, slip stitch into that following stitch into the base, flip our work, and now we'll be putting 1 back loop half double crochet into every stitch, leaving the last one. We've made our way down with our second row. We have left that last stitch. Now into that last stitch, we're just going to do an increase of 2 back loop half doubles. So that's just 1, and then a second back loop half double all into that last stitch. Now it's just going to be a repeat of the 2 previous rows until we reach our middle stitch marker stitch. So all we're going to do from here is chain 2, flip our work, put 1 back loop half double crochet into every stitch, and connect it into the base the same way that we just did. Then working our way back down, 1 back loop half double crochet into every stitch with an increase into that last stitch. I'll meet you back once we reached our middle stitch marker. We are back. We have the increase half of our neckline completed. Now we're going to do our middle row. Our middle row is going to be worked into our stitch marker stitch, and that shouldn't have any increases or decreases. So from where we're at, chain 2, flip our work. 1 back loop half double crochet into every stitch while connecting it into our stitch marker stitch. Then working our way back up the other side of our front panel, we're basically going to be mirroring everything we did here, but instead of increases, we're going to be doing decreases. So once when we're into the base, we're going to work our way back down. So connect it into the base the same way that we just did, put 1 back loop half double crochet into every stitch, then leaving the last 2 stitches, and then I'll meet you back to show you how we're going to do our decrease. So we have just completed our middle row and also made our way back down with our following half double crochet row, leaving the last 2 stitches. So what we're all going to do is yarn over into that second to last stitch, pull through, into that last stitch, pull through, yarn over, pull through all 4, and that's it. Our following row is going to be a back loop half double crochet with no increases and no decreases. So then all we're going to do is continue to repeat those 2 previous rows, making sure that we're connecting it into the base the same way until we reach our following stitch marker stitch, and then I'll meet you back. So we are back. The front of our cowl is completed. Now I am worked into my stitch marker stitch, so we're just going to basically repeat everything that we did here, but without any increases or decreases, working into the stitches within the back of our piece. So everything else is going to be pretty much the same. Once we made our way all the way around, I'll meet you guys back so we can seam it all up together. We are back and we have just completed the entirety of our collar. Now we don't have any more stitches left to work into, so we're going to seam it up, but this seam is actually going to be done exactly the same way as the bottom of our sleeve and our sides. So just to talk you guys through it, making sure that our work is slipped right side out, right side up. We're all going to do our outside loop slip stitch seam until we don't have any more stitches left to work into. When we don't, we are all done. Do a chain up one and cut, and then the last thing we're going to have to do is just weave in all of our ends. And there you have it. Hope y'all enjoy the tutorial. Join us on Instagram, Pinterest, or Twitter. Those links are down below. And don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Catch you on the next one. Bye!